And God said, Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. There are two occasions in the history of the world when the entire earth was completely covered in water. The first of these is the scene that we saw in verse 2 of this chapter, when darkness was upon the face of the deep and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. The second of these, and the more recent one, was during the flood, when again we read the phrase, the face of the waters, chapter 7, verse 18. Moses records that all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered, verse 19, and that the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days, verse 24. Now, out of this shoreless ocean, God made dry land appear. The picture that I see in my mind is the waters being collected together so that dry land could rise up out of the sea, a place for mankind to dwell. There's no indication of what the landmass looked like, although I do get the sense of a large area of dry land and a large area of sea. It seems extremely unlikely that the world map of those early days would have been anything like today's. The cataclysm of the flood would doubtless have completely altered the shape of the world that then was. 2 Peter chapter 3. God called the dry land earth, verse 10, or simply land. And the huge pool of water was called seas, not necessarily meaning there were lots of them, lots of seas, but perhaps indicating that all the seas that there would be in subsequent world history were then in one place. Here we see God dividing once again. The light from the darkness on the first day, the waters under from the waters above the expanse on the second day, dry land and sea on the third day. And notice again that when this division was made, God saw that it was good, verse 10. It's important that we understand that God was ordering his creation and establishing boundaries. And we will see it again in the Garden of Eden in chapter 2 with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in verse 9 of that chapter. The sad history of humanity has been marred by the fact that people do not accept boundaries. Nations go to war because they do not accept boundaries. Homes and marriages can be ruined because people do not want to keep to boundaries. Lives can be destroyed because we will not submit to the boundaries that God has placed upon his creatures for their good. It was Pharaoh in Exodus chapter 5 who uttered in defiance the words, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice?" In a few short weeks, he would have his answer when the children of Israel passed through the Red Sea, as we read there, on dry land, and his army perished in the cold waters of the Red Sea as they closed in upon it. In a reversal of what God did on this third day of creation, obedience to God's boundaries is essential. Tomorrow we will consider a different kind of boundary that God also put into his wonderful creation.